Good afternoon and welcome to Streaming Media West Connect's last session of the day. I think I can safely say good afternoon because it's finally afternoon for all of our panelists and speakers across the U.S. I'm Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media Magazine and the conference chair for Streaming Media West Connect. We're supposed to be in Huntington Beach if things were normal, but as we all know, they're anything but normal these days. I suppose the advantage of doing things virtually is that people who wouldn't otherwise be able to come and join us at a Streaming Media West event can join us and view our discussion. We are wrapping up day one. We've got 3 more days of panels covering everything from deep technical topics like WebRTC and live streaming production to big picture panels looking at the sports and esports market, looking at live streaming in the new normal, looking at ad technology. So we do hope to see you throughout the course of the week. And next week, we also have our Content Delivery Summit on Monday, October 5th, as well as several deep dive workshops, 3-hour-long workshops from people like Jan Ozer and Robert Reinhardt talking about things like FFmpeg, WebRTC, and Jan Ozer producing a streaming media boot camp. So come back for those if that's your thing. Before we move on to our discussion today, though, I'd like to thank our Streaming Media West Connect Platinum sponsor, Limelight Networks, and we do have a brief word from our Platinum sponsor now.
At Limelight, we're in the business of connecting people to exceptional digital experiences. Our real-time edge platform has launched and grown some of the largest video properties in the world. When there's a high-traffic industry event via the internet, the chances are we're helping deliver it. The difference? Limelight's global private network puts content and applications right next to your customers at the network edge. This result is the most dynamic real-time interactions, no matter where your customers are or what their business is. Like our network, we've also optimized our software stack to be fast, reliable, and secure. And our customers have unrestricted access to live regional technical support whenever it's needed. Limelight Networks has the capacity, the global footprint, and expert service worldwide needed to meet the growing demands for online content now and in the future.
And I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Digital Element. Digital Element's Justin Scogan will be joining the panel, which will be focusing on OTT personalization. Before I forget, remember that if you want to ask questions at any point during the presentation or the panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab. I will pass those along to our panel. You can enter them in chat if you want, but if we have them in the Q&A tab, it helps us keep track of them better so they don't get lost. Obviously, with the tremendous growth in the number of services on the OTT market and the amount of content in each and every one of those services, it's become more and more of a challenge for people to find what they want, to feel like they're watching a service that's just for them. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next hour or so. Personalization, creating personalized challenged or creating channels within channels. And Nadine has put together a terrific panel. Nadine Krefetz of Reality Software, who is a longtime streaming media contributing editor, is going to kick things off now with her speakers. So Nadine, let me pass it along to you.
Thank you very much, Eric. So today we've got a great panel on creating personalized OTT channels. And I think one of the cool things about this is because right now people want to innovate and stay competitive, getting somebody's attention is probably the most important thing. In fact, I would say it's actually the special sauce that goes into streaming. And even getting these people here is just made it so much more of kind of a valuable thing for us because we get a chance to look into a couple of different companies. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And first off, I'm going to have Sarah do an introduction for herself, and she'll tell us a little bit about herself. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Lyons, and I head up the product experience for Hbo Max. And for those of you who don't know, Hbo Max is Warner Media's new direct-to-consumer streaming platform we just launched. at the end of May, and our platform bundles all of HBO with favorites from the Warner Media's library of shows and movies. And we have a great collection of programming, and I'd say a good customer experience to go along with it. So we'll just do a quick little video to give you guys a taste.
A great future awaits us.
These ghosts aren't gonna stop till you join them on the other side.
I had this idea of the perfect life.
The flight attendant, she knows more than she's saying.
You are the mother of humanity. Let's go!
Perfect. I love that promo. So, in fact, it shows me a lot of things I want to go take a look at. Justin, you're up next. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Digital Elements does?
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Sarah. That's a tough one to follow. My name is Justin Scogan. I lead sales and business development for North America here at Digital Element. Digital Element is an industry-leading provider for IP intelligence and geolocation data. We are a complement and/or enhancement to personalization in a number of different verticals, but work with many different media houses, and are looking forward to learning more today and shedding some light on some of the data opportunities that we provide the marketplace.
Okay, very cool. And you know, I'm sensing you might be maybe on the West Coast based on that picture behind you. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, cool. Let's move on to Jerry. Jerry, let's have a little bit about you.
Thanks. I'm Jerry Field. I'm the Vice President of Technology and Distribution Services at American Public Television. If we could go to the 2 slides that I have, that'd be great. The first one. Maybe not. Okay, so I'll move along. The American Public Television is a nonprofit organization based in Boston. We are the major syndicator of television programming for public television stations. Thank you for that. It gives us some idea of some of the personalities that we have in the programs that we distribute. We do a lot of the lifestyle programming that's on public television stations across the country comes from us. We were established in 1961 as the Eastern Educational Television Network. It was pre-PBS, and we've been distributing programs between stations in that time, lots of different ways. We have a very deep catalog. If we can go to the next slide. We have a very deep catalog of about 7,600 titles right now, and a pioneer in many of those genres that, as I mentioned, particularly cooking, travel, home improvement, but also a good amount of drama too. A lot of very popular drama shows on public television come through us. So we're a distributor, and we go from producers and distributors of programming to the stations themselves. We also created 2 different sub-channels for public television too, both the Create channel and the World channel. Create is a lifestyle channel 24/7. World is a news and public affairs service that is often 24/7 on local stations as well. So that's a basic idea of who we are. Our basic play is a B2B, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, because again, we're a middleman between about 300 plus producers of programming and about 175 stations in all the markets across the country. So we'll be talking about that. Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you very much. And I think one of the cool things Jerry will talk about too is the B2B distribution and personalization is a little bit different, but the principles are also still very relevant to people. Next up, we've got Randa. Randa, why don't you introduce yourself and your company?
Hi, thank you very much. I am president and co-founder of a startup called Resonance AI, and we're in Seattle primarily. Resonance AI is a platform for, as I said, media and advertisers, but what we do is we decipher the critical elements inside of content, and we tie that together with performance. And performance can be linear ratings, sure, but also we do a lot of work with platforms, with apps, if you will. And with that, we are able to turn that critical, all those critical elements, bring them together, and with a beautiful UI, we deliver outcomes that also will support those recommendation engines. So when you know what somebody is doing, a device is doing on a second-by-second basis, the recommendation engine is a very powerful tool to understand what you can super serve to that subscriber. So at the end of the day, knowing how to string those together, and with massive, massive correlation, you begin to understand how to super serve your customer. At the end of the day, that's what everybody wants. We grow ratings and we help retain ratings and or audience in any way, shape, or form. So we always say, know what works.
Okay, very cool. And we're going to go a little bit further into that later on. You know, one of the things that happens is that people have the ability to kind of think recommendations or personalization is a little bit creepy. And so, you know, this came up when we were planning the session, and, you know, the question that was, how do you keep from being Big Brother-like when you're providing your programming? And Sarah, I think you started off with this kind of notion, but, you know, what's some of the things that you do so that you actually are making people kind of interested but not afraid?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, we've done a lot of consumer research, and when you ask consumers, do they find recommendations helpful, and you use that word recommendations, it's funny, you actually nowadays see them kind of recoil. They have this bad taste in their mouth, and they say things like, how could an algorithm or a robot purport to know who I am or what I like? So they're definitely jaded, and they're aware that there's recommendations engines out there now, whereas about 10 years ago, even 7 years ago-ish, if you asked them that question, they weren't nearly as aware that there were algorithms driving what content's shown to them. So very interesting. So you have to do it in a very balanced way, a way that's helpful and that feels very personalized to them, especially if you're creating a service that's meant for a large audience. It should feel like when each and every individual goes in there that it's meant for me, but without kind of overtly shoving content down their throats that they may not like, or that seems very self-serving or very, very advertorial, if you will. So that's one thing, just kind of that delicate balance. And then the other thing we truly believe in is having kind of a human touch and human curation, and really making it feel to users like there are other humans behind this service that care just as much about content and are just as passionate as they are. You know, we're users of these services too, and we understand and get you. And so having an element of hand curation and a human teeing up content that may resonate, and then using underlying data to personalize those editorial curation moments, that's where that sweet spot is, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. And, you know, I asked Jerry kind of to follow up on this. And one of the reasons is that as a technologist, Jerry, I kind of think of you having a slightly different take on this, although you have the same real reason to have a personalized content, it's on a B2B market.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things for technology for public media that has been involved is that one is that, bear with me a second, but again, looking at the B2B part of this, the distribution of programming has really changed a lot in the last couple of years. And we've gone before from having sort of a fire hose of information available over satellite feeds to stations to, in the last couple of years, changing to a terrestrial-based, if you will, an internet-connected base of stations being able to pull programs from a library. So, you know, in some ways, the stations have much more of a personalized opportunity now to be able to pull only those programs that they really want. And for APT, it's an important thing because we have, out of the 7,600 programs we have in distribution, many of them are proven programs that run in different kinds of schedules at different stations at different times. So that idea about going from a push to a pull model is really a very major thing. One of the ways that we have supported that, and I think that maybe a connection to what we're beginning to do more with direct to consumers, is the The client portal at My APT, at APT Online, allows stations to do different kinds of filtering of our entire catalog and being able to see what they've chosen before, what programs might be related to that, what programs might be complementary to that, and have a much easier way to be able to look through, again, the fire hose of content that's there. So a lot of the same kind of thing is what we're looking at too in terms of recommendations for consumers on that side.
Okay. And one of the interesting things I think that I find is that here's a PricewaterhouseCoopers research report that says that last year, and this was just last year, 76% of viewers said they're satisfied with their streaming services, but half of the consumers say they intend to subscribe to the new entrants in the market. And as well, they said almost 64% will downgrade. So they will replace one service with another. And that's really important when it comes to obviously matching what it is that people are interested in. Now, Justin, your business is a little bit different. So you're not specifically looking at the actual content, but what are you looking at when it comes to working with media companies in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Nadine. We're providing an opportunity to leverage an IP address for targeting capabilities, and that can lend to value add in from a number of different angles, if you will. Location, B2B, carrier specific, performance related things, technology as far as routing is concerned for peak performance. Those are all different enhancements and or value adds that we can provide that data engine that all of these companies have in the background. So while we won't directly influence the content specifically, we have a fantastic opportunity to play a role in that data process and that data viewing for personalization. So if there's content that might be specific to a region, I would think in Jerry's world that might apply. You can localize those types of things using our data. And I think the key takeaway from that is it's non-invasive, right? There is no big brother associated with an IP address. IP address is pretty standalone as far as our offering is concerned. So we may get down to a postal code level, but we're definitely not hitting a household where somebody has to worry that Big Brother's looking at them or somebody is spying on them. They can rely on the people that know at HBO and APT and these other organizations to form fit the experience as best they can with the information they're provided.
Okay. All right. Now, Randa, you're coming at it from a different perspective. So what do you contribute to your customers when it comes to adding into the personalization so that people have an insight and intelligence behind it?
It's really around us contributing what that viewer is doing. When I think about how Netflix has categorized its genres, if you will, we're so used to talking about genres in terms of, oh, it's comedy, it's dramedy, and it's, that is too simplistic for the world we're in today. So what we need to do is cross-correlate, multimodal correlate across all the different data that we can pull in on a second-by-second basis, and use that to help begin to understand how to make recommendations that are more interesting to the consumer. They are willing to trade that privacy for that sort of experience, right? Inside of an app, it's a walled garden, if you will. And so I'm giving you, you know exactly what my device is doing, as a subscriber, what I am doing. And that's how we apply it back to a recommendation engine. And then you start turning it into, well, they like this, we'll try that, etc. So it becomes smarter and smarter and smarter. Your knowledge of the subscriber becomes better and better and better. And then you begin to have them go more deeply into the long tail of your content, which is critical to keeping them.
Okay. All right. Very cool. In fact, that's kind of how we're going to do this. We're going to just go deep into it. So, one of the things we talked about was Sarah was going to mention what the personalization and customization features are at HBO Max, especially for people who, if there are out there, who haven't looked yet. What do you do, Sarah, that kind of makes people compelled to have a really specific environment for themselves, for their viewing?
Yeah, so, obviously personalization and making the service feel tailored to you is important, but also giving the user a little bit of control and autonomy is important too. Those are kind of visceral needs of a human being. And so I always like to build capabilities based off kind of human needs, human nature. So first and foremost, we enable a user to create an individual profile. So households subscribe, there's usually one person in the household that's the actual account holder, but more often than not, there are multiple people, individuals in the household, and those individuals are very different, as are their viewing patterns. So we allow each household account to create up to 5 user profiles so that each person in the house can have their own profile. And when they log into the experience, then that profile can tailor everything to that user's viewing behaviors, needs, wants, desires. And so that profile, as they start to build up viewing history, we create 2 different lists for them that are the go-to for most consumers in most scenarios. So the first one is what we call a continue watching tray. And so as you start to watch content, that tray appears on your homepage of the app. And in essence, that is all the content that I'm in the middle of, whether it's a movie and I've paused it and I might want to pick it up the rest of it later. Like me with my 7-year-old son, I can't watch till he goes to bed. So I don't get through a full movie in an evening, unfortunately, nowadays. Could be that, or it could be a series that I'm watching and maybe I've completed episode 2 and I'm ready for episode 3. We'll populate that episode 3 in that continue watching tray so that it's easy for a user to go back to that content that they're in the middle of. And the next, we allow the user to add things to their list to save for later. And so those 2 things together, again, comprise the lion's share of viewing in all of our reading of consumers' usage data patterns, et cetera. 2/3 of the time, they're going back to stuff that they habitually watch. So things they're in the middle of. So interestingly enough, most of the time they know what they want. And it's something that they either regularly view on a pattern each week, or that's something that they're, again, binging in the middle of. And so you, in those instances, just need to get out of their way and get them to that content that they want as fast as possible. So really, it's 1/3 of the time that they're looking for something new. And then that's where the hand curation and personalization comes in to make sure you're teeing up the content to them that might resonate the most. Okay. And then the other thing that's really important to us is to give parents control for their kids. So again, because we can have individual profiles in the household, we allow our users to create a child's profile and indicate how old their child is, and allow parents to set parental control ratings based on the maturity that they think that child is. And so they can make sure that they're setting a walled garden of content for their son or daughter that's appropriate, or that the parent thinks is appropriate for that child's maturity and age. And then when the child goes into their profile, they're locked in there and they have the freedom to explore and discover content, but all content that's appropriate and a parent can feel safe. So again, as a mother of a 7-year-old, hyper important for us parents to be able to kind of hand the device and walk away. Right. So again, giving users not only personalization, tailored to the child's age, but a little bit of control and autonomy.
Okay. And, I think, Justin, we were talking earlier about the kinds of services you offer and the kinds of controls or the kinds of data. So you talked a little bit earlier about the data that you're providing for media companies, but can you give me a little bit more insight as to what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on, location, localization. We can drive country on down to postal code, even zip +4 here in the US. So you can start to get a pretty good idea around the location analytics of a particular viewer. And sometimes content is localized. And I think there is a regional aspect or a geographic aspect to the value add of segmenting that traffic as best you can. But I would say that the value add behind the scenes before a Jerry or a Sarah have an opportunity to add that personal touch is the security piece. And it isn't about an age range or any of those other things. It's more about, geographically speaking, is this content viable here? Is there a compliance measure? Is there a regulatory concern? We work with the Netflixes and the Hulus, even HBO, which I just learned about this week in South America, to ensure that specific regionally based content is held to that standard. And we make sure that every aspect of that licensing process is backed by the best geolocation data possible from a country and or a region perspective. So I would say that while the personalization piece is really, really important. We're a little bit earlier in the funnel, if you will, providing a value add to ensure that that content is delivered appropriately, is licensed for that region, and any type of circumvention tools or proxies or VPNs, things of that nature, are identified so that the media companies out there and the platforms can make those types of decisions on what traffic is allowed where.
Okay. You know, I love that we have people from each different part of the funnel. This is great because Jerry's going to talk about B2B. So as a syndicator for you, you're looking at, you know, how does, you talked a little bit earlier about how personalization works for the stations, but do you have more that you can kind of give us an insight into about what your stations kind of find is important when they go to buy?
I mean, sure, because they're all the stations are getting feedback either through their their various membership channels or that kind of thing, and also I haven't really specifically mentioned about the streaming that many of the stations are doing, and that the system nationwide is supporting. So. Maybe going back to an earlier part of something that Sarah said, is that I think the idea of removing friction as much as possible is really what we're really interested in doing here, and trying to make it so that it's really easy to get directed towards things that make sense for you. You know, we want to try to avoid on the streaming end of things of having the search for programming is the main channel that you're watching all the time, and then maybe eventually you get to some content that you like. We want to be able to get to that point pretty quickly. To the question though, as far as how we handle that, I mean, it's important for us as a distributor to provide good descriptions of the programs. And I think it was a question that was in the Q&A part of that, that we need to be able to make sure that we are representing the programs uniformly across the system so that people can find them. And there are a number of different ways that we're doing that, and particularly moving to the terrestrial-based distribution system, we have a lot more opportunity to do that. We're actually looking at and using more of the IDER IDs for the content that we have. We actually import a fair amount of content from Europe, and it's really important that we try to have the descriptors about the programs to be able to be rich enough to be able to work into all of the other kinds of channels that stations may put that content in. It's broadcast programming, broadcast channels primarily, but there also are other streaming opportunities as well that are growing, you know, every year. So I think that might answer that.
And what the question was, I'll read it and we'll see if there's any other feedback on this. It said, for content providers here, wondering how they navigate the challenge of getting their content metadata, descriptions, images, etc., populated as robustly and uniformly as possible across the wide array of distribution platforms. So I guess it sounds like, Jerry, is there a difference between metadata going into one platform versus another?
Yeah, there really can be. I mean, a lot of what we've done for building the system has really had to get a lot of people together to come up with an agreement on standard schema that, you know, ways that we could describe programming. And that's, everybody in the business is dealing with that all the time. But, you know, we're really looking at it broader too. The idea about the entertainment ID registry is that you know, those are really sort of global identifiers about programs and basic descriptions of programs. So one of the challenges for us is that getting programs information into program descriptions in online guides and that kind of thing is also very difficult. And our programs, the other added challenge for us is that they do not get universal carriage across the system. Our programs are really scheduled by individual stations at their will. So a given program may show up in different markets at different schedules, you know, all over the place. So we want to make sure that we're consistently representing the program that way. But it's good, hard, basic work of sitting down and looking at you know, descriptors and fields and trying to figure out how they map.
Okay. Justin, is this an area that you're active in too?
Almost missed the mute. A little bit, yeah. We do license data to some of the platforms from a distribution perspective, and again, it's the same type of use cases. but I do, to echo Jerry, I mean, I think it's really important, and it's a fantastic question. But adding, just adding localization, more metadata, and another layer of security in the pipeline is where we would where we play a role there.
Okay, that's not the thing, obviously, as a consumer you ever think about. So
Really
I'm
don't,
gonna
right.
no, I'm gonna jump to another question in a little bit of a different direction, and I'm gonna ask Randa this one to start with. But so where are we with machine learning in terms of how it integrates into personalization?
Well, you absolutely cannot really have it without it. I want to dovetail on what Justin and Jerry here have just said about the complexity of just bringing all of this data together and making it useful. An example on the content owner side is when you think about distribution and realize that there are so many cable systems out there that could be running the exact same content, as Jerry has said, at completely different ways and times. And then there's also the ability to play it back later. Well, when you as a content owner come back and try to pull together your numbers on that, what was my audience? Tell me what my audience was from every single source. That's an enormous lift. And it takes inside of some content companies a day to pull all that together. We literally wrote a program to pull that together. That's the beauty of ML. We can help really bring that data together, even if it's disparate data, and allow you then to start using it. ML is absolutely vital to personalization. Without that, without the crunch that we've got now with the cloud, with Elasticsearch, with all of the databases that allow you to integrate all kinds of data in near real time, you don't have it. And consumers today demand it. They demand that it is up to date and it is really tailored to them.
Okay. All right. And, I know one of the things that I find when I'm watching content is I'm always really impressed by the amazing amount of variables. I think I once spoke to a research company and they had so many classifications. You're right. There's the idea that as a consumer, you see drama or comedy, there's so many permutations here. But Jerry, again, you're the technologist. So, what's your perspective on machine learning?
Well, it's a leap from looking at Google Analytics from things and looking at that and to the idea about getting to those reports a whole lot quicker. It's I think that Randa's point, I'm not being as eloquent as she was with it, but it really is the case that we used to talk about big data and managing big data. Well, we're dealing with infinite data at this point, and so being able to go through a collection of data and be able to glean any meaning out of it is really a very important thing. So yes, and a lot of times for us, we do carriage reports, traditional carriage reports for stations, but we also need to just keep on upping the game on that to really try to get a sense of who's actually watching what for how long in a given space. Again, the idea about making the leap between or the melding between traditional broadcast and streaming is really what we're very interested in, and I think that's where we're only going to see more of that happening. Machine learning is going to be more and more important.
Okay. In fact, one of the things. Okay, so you're saying infinite data. Sarah's saying a third new. So, that brings me to what's the table stakes that people have to have for personalization. So for those of you who have been building things for a long time, but I want to kind of get feedback and I haven't really put an order out here in terms of who might speak to this first. But, when I think, for instance, Justin, I remember we talked about, what you thought of as personalization as a customer, but why don't we start off with you? What's the table stakes for personalization?
Yeah, I'll echo what I said last time. I'm a sports geek, so I would love the idea. I mean, I literally subscribe to DirecTV only so I can watch the NFL out of network, right? My wife and I have our separate teams, and we can't watch them here in Seattle. I literally pay the premium just to be able to watch the NFL and to be able to watch it when I want. Mm-hmm. I also, I'm an HBO guy. I'm a Showtime guy. I love Netflix. There's shows that I can only watch on Hulu. You can imagine what the media bill is in my house month to month, right? I have 2 children, both teenage age group. the plethora of different media in my house is unfathomable. And personalization to me would be, I want to watch this, and this. Forget the genres, to what Randa said earlier. Like, it's not specific enough anymore. If I could pay a flat rate per month for media and I could choose it like a menu, a la carte style, that's where I would like to see it going as a consumer. I don't know how much that helps being the sponsor, but if I could be greedy, I would love to be able to pick it that way.
Okay, so it sounds like you're gonna go shopping. You're gonna one here, one here, one here, one here. But I'm gonna guess that you might actually buy a lot more stuff that way. But maybe not. Who knows?
See, that's
anyway.
the way I look at it. Maximize
Okay.
it, optimize the spend by each consumer. Absolutely.
Okay. So now, Sarah, on the other side of this, when we talk about table stakes for personalization, you know, what are the things that you think, you mentioned some of them earlier, but what do you think is important for companies to have? And without them, they're just not going to be competitive.
Yeah, well, in general, I think table stakes nowadays, it's about listening to your user. It's really about being open and transparent, taking in the feedback from your customers and acting on it and showing them you're acting on it. You know, consumers are very savvy nowadays. And so I think having a real relationship and really incorporating their feedback into your product roadmap is hyper important. You know, and knowing that that their voice is heard makes them feel good about the service they're subscribing to. So it's funny, you know, back in the day, in the early days of streaming, you know, it was all about features and bells and whistles. And nowadays, I think it's a little less about features. You know, sure, there are some things that are important, but because everyone, you know, largely has a similar set of features, it's about the overall experience and about the customers feeling heard.
Okay. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, one of the parts of that that's important is obviously getting the great content that people want to see. So, and that's not a feature, but that's why people are there. But I mean, Randa, when you're thinking about kind of what table stakes are for personalization, what comes to mind?
Well, I think that personalization is the golden ticket. There are a lot of streaming services out there. There are a lot of media options out there today. And consumers, they only have so much budget and they only have so much time. So the better the personalization is, the ease of use of that app or that streaming service is going to start to define what customers choose. They can't buy all of the media out there. We are exceptions. We buy all the media out there because, let's face it, it's kind of our job. And I absolutely love media, so I'm going to be very happy consuming it. But they've only got so much budget. So choices will be made over time. I've literally watched people say, well, I subscribe to this streaming service, but I'm dropping it now. Well, why are you dropping it? They've got great stuff. Well, I watched what I went there for. And that's a problem. If you have a consumer that you can't shift them into using other programming on your service quickly and really giving them personalization that makes it sticky, they're going to dump. And that doesn't help anybody. So that's how vital I think it is. I think it is absolutely the most critical component of longevity. You've got to get them there and you've got to super serve them, and you need data to do that. You really have to have a massive amount of data. The better the recommendation, the more sticky, the more they'll stay.
Okay, so we're still going back from the infinite data thing. Now, Jerry, you are also working with, you have a lot of different stations and people then from across the country. So for you, you know, what do you see your customers thinking of as table stakes?
It varies quite a bit. I mean, there's a good percentage of our programming that is pretty high, broad, general interest programming, and that gets carried on quite a few stations. And then the rest of it is really very much for the stations as far as what they schedule for their linear broadcasts. It really does change and varies, you know, market by market. There are some of our programs that we only license for individual markets. So, you know, and we're looking for how we're going to be able to manage those. So again, getting the feedback from stations, sometimes it's as simple as just regular feedback from a program buyer at a station, but other times it's really looking at what the performance of the program has been in for as far as the audience goes. But the audience generally, I mean, for public television, there's a couple of different things. Is that one is our audience is older. Our audience was built and drawn on the idea of a linear program schedule, which now means less and less. And we're also much more interested in getting younger audiences, getting exposed to public television programs. That's why a lot of the activity that you're seeing from local stations about being much more locally oriented and much more web oriented as well, and streaming service oriented is really means everything to them. We have to provide programming where where people want to watch it, when they want to watch it, and that's what our efforts are all about.
Okay. So we've got basically people want to be able to buy a lot of stuff. We should be listening to them as to what they feel is their choice. We have, focus on what the consumers actually do buy, and then there's a variety of people. There's younger, there's older, there's people who are very tech, there's people who are less tech friendly, I should say. So if some consumers though have gotten jaded, what impresses them? Because as a consumer, for me, and like Randa's saying, we get to sit down and watch a lot of this stuff, and I got to watch earlier in the day, and I felt like I was working. So I think that what I want to know is, if people have gotten jaded, what impresses them? Sarah, do you have any insight there, or do you have any insight you want to share, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I think Randa said it well. At the end of the day, if you can surface the content that matters to the user and it feels effortless to them, then that's a delightful experience that they're willing to engage with over and over. And especially if you can surface new things that they move on to after something they've completed. And so that seems very simple at the surface, but to everyone's point, there's a lot underneath that to make that happen. But that seamless user experience is, at the end of the day, what's going to win. And it's interesting. Again, I use my 7-year-old son as a litmus test for a lot of things, because I think he's kind of the next generation of video watchers and has grown up with screens. Sorry to say as a parent, but grown up with screens, and the way he interacts with content is very different than our generation. He's very immersed in it, and he's moving, clicking, watching this, watching that, stopping this, going back to this. It's very fluid movement through the content, because things are just kind of surfaced up to him. Even when he couldn't yet read, he didn't know what he wanted. He didn't even know what the show was or the clip was, but he was still interacting and kind of moving through content in a very seamless manner. And so I think just that magical experience is really what would end up moving the needle at the end of the day, with all this underlying capability that's driving it.
Okay. And that's the other thing that I think the traditional media companies came at, the media world with a distribution method that was a more static method. And so now we've got companies like TikTok and Facebook, and we've got a lot of different things coming at people. And so I think one of the challenges is that not only do you have to have great content, but you also have kind of, interesting features and innovative things that people find compelling. Because like you said, trying to appeal to somebody who is younger, or a child, has different kind of needs. Now, Justin, you look at a lot of data when it comes to audiences, and you look at, where people are watching and what they're watching. Is there anything you can share with us about the kind of thing about either how long people view for, or, what types of things that you see as trends in the data that you look at?
A quick correction, Dean. We actually don't see any of the results of the data that we license. We simply arm the organization, the media company, the platform with the ability to make their own decisions and to start to learn from that data. So we're a complement to any existing analytics they have, right? And it teaches them about their traffic. So if they know, for instance, for Jerry, if Jerry knows that an afternoon programming from one of his stations is viewed by a greater number of people from the Pacific Northwest versus the Southern region, they can make some inferences, and they can plug that into whatever decision engine internally they have to maybe personalize or form fit that content the next time, right? Or however that may, or even dynamically if they're automated in that sense. So we don't have the intel to be able to say that this particular device, this particular user, or even this particular IP watched a particular piece of content for a specific period of time. We're more out in front of that, where we allow a Jerry or a Sarah or a Randa to help leverage that information based on that IP address in a new way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sorry about that. And
That's okay.
so, in fact, we do. I was going to ask Randa to further comment, but I've got a question here that says, how do you find meaning in second-by-second data? How do you recognize what is significant and what isn't? More broadly, how do you match the content to the data?
I believe that was a me question.
It is. It says to Randa. Yes.
Thank you. It's device level data, so it's downloaded in that second-by-second format. And what we're doing is we're looking at the critical elements inside that video. And I don't mean objects like cars and planes. What we're looking at are things that the audience engages with. Is it mood? Is it the conversation between the characters? What is happening on the screen that is actually interesting? What are the themes, storylines, music, words per minute? Things that are controllable on the production side. We're looking at what the audience does. And if you think about it, it's fairly binary in a single sense or a single device. It's on, it's off. They came, they left. When you look at a massive amount of data over time, let's say you're looking at an entire series for an entire season, and every single second of that content correlated to what the audience is doing. It's millions and millions and millions of calculations to surface what is actually meaningful and relevant to that audience. What are they reacting to? And it's very powerful in the sense that it can be done on a daily basis for news, or it can, for content, movies. It's done, the analysis is done after the fact. So I hope that answers your question, but it is vitally important to do it on a second-by-second basis. A quick example, let's say it's a news show, right? That segment could be 2 minutes long. I can't help you if I'm only looking at quarter-hour data. I have to know when that household stopped watching. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about content, we can then determine what is more bingeable, what show is more bingeable to this viewer. Did they come in episode 3 of a season and then go back and watch it? Did they review? Did they rewind? Not really rewind, but you know what I mean. All of that information is vital to understanding what that subscriber is really doing with your content. And then it becomes predictive going forward. This looks like this, therefore the performance should be this with this device.
Okay. I'm going to totally switch gears here for a second here, and we have an audience member who asked about immersive use, and they're asking about 5G. I'm going to move this over to ATSC3 because Jerry had some comments he wanted to share about Next Gen TV, and so Jerry, I'll let you cover this, but essentially Next Gen TV is ATSC 3.0 in action. So give us a little bit of background and an example of why this is immersive or interactive for people.
Sure. The basic part of it, ATSC 1.0 was the standard that was used to move us from analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. And ATSC 3.0, which is now more commonly being referred to as Next Gen TV, the industry is really using that as the marketing term, is the next standard of that. And of course, it's not backwardly compatible. So it's a whole heavy lift again to a new way of broadcasting. And the basic difference with it is that it's IP based. And in effect, what it means is it takes a broadcast signal and turns it into a fairly good size IP fire hose that you can send out to an audience, and with a next gen receiver, it at least opens the door to lots of different kinds of possibilities, including the fact that it's assuming that there will be a return channel through some method viewing data and responses or interactivity can be created. this is just at the beginning stages, although moving relatively rapidly. And a lot of people thought that the pandemic was going to slow things down, and it really hasn't in many ways. There are a lot of markets that are now starting to really sort of gear up services, albeit limited at this point in limited viewership. But it's really sort of like raising the question for all of us about how do we see what's going to come down the road, and what kind of services are going to be different. Things like targeted programming within a market are at least possible. And unfortunately, with any kind of good technology, there's a lot of stuff that's possible. The hard work is making it happen. And there are a lot of major broadcast organizations that are really very committed to this and moving it along. Sinclair has been doing a lot of advocating of the idea of using a combination of next-gen TV and 5G services to be able to, again, a lot of it is really the idea about data services and delivering data services in a market. There are a number of public television stations, including the North Carolina group. It's a statewide network that's really looking at ATSC 3.0 for public service and public safety services as well. So there's a whole other area of service that may be available through this. And the real challenge now is really trying to build it, model it, and try to see how it works. Sorry, can't hear.
Excuse me. So, as a matter of fact, see, it's because I was going to give you a commercial pitch. There is an ATSC 3 article coming out in streaming media soon.
Great.
Yeah. Now, ATSC is complicated. We also have a question here about voice to start with. You know, is that something that people find is helpful for surfacing content, or is it something that people are not using that much yet? Sarah, what's your sense of when you look at, you know, usage or research that you read about people using voice?
Yeah, you know, based on consumer feedback, I think it's becoming more and more important to users, especially on a big screen where they don't have as much touch control. Mm-hmm. You know, however, there's kind of you know, definitely a desire to have it evolve a little more before people really engage in it heavily. You know, especially when it comes to things like disambiguation, being able to kind of have a conversation back and forth with the voice control to kind of boil down to what you really want or what you're looking for. Consumers want to talk in a more natural way to voice. And so we're just not quite yet at the point where it becomes really natural. I think once it does, that's where a tipping point will happen where more and more consumers will use it. So definitely of interest, definitely growing, and, you know, and one to look at and watch.
Okay. You know, the voice question, it's come up, and I think it's interesting. Some people say that it's, you know, easier to use, but Randa, do you have any data that you've acquired on how people use voice?
We actually haven't acquired data per se, mostly because it's fairly nascent, and as Sarah has already said, I can give you experience with it. I mean, I've read a great deal about consumers being a little bit reluctant about it, especially when it's Alexa. But I think it's going to become more and more accepted. However, I will say that Comcast has done, honestly, an excellent job integrating voice into the X1 platform. And where I wasn't interested in it as a consumer per se, until Comcast started to integrate streaming apps into the X1 platform. And this is literally brilliant. The aggregation at first seemed kind of silly, but it isn't. And what I've seen it evolve into is people pick up the remote and say, speak to it and say, I want to watch Devil's Advocate. And so what it does is it shows you where Devil's Advocate is playing anywhere. And my husband says, oh, it's on Netflix. Great. Click one button, we're in. We didn't punch in anything. We didn't search. It's there. Secondarily, when we think about pay-per-view video, right, your opportunity to rent, if you will, or buy, that's actually one of the options. So all of the options come up just on command, and you can choose, okay, I'll pay to rent it. And it could be on Amazon Prime, it could be on your Showtime, it could be on HBO Max. Soon HBO Max, I know, is coming to Comcast, and that makes it even better.
Okay. All right. Sarah, you can give her, you know, I can't even make that joke because we don't want to be inaccurate.
I do not work for Comcast.
No, anyway. Okay. We have very few little time left, and I wanted to make sure that we cover the next question. I have to admit that to me, I think voice is a brilliant use of a technology to kind of find and surface things. But Justin, if we move on to privacy, location-based data, and you know, the question came in also about rules around using GDPR. You know, what are you able to gather, analyze for personalization? What is off the table?
I'm not sure what's off the table. I can tell you our data is still on the table. We went through the roller coaster of GDPR briefly with CCPA. And the good news is, you know, for the most part, outside of a few countries in the European Union, most people understand an IP address as a standalone piece of data is not PII, right? So targeting advertising, localizing a promotion, using our data to an extent that allows privacy across a platform or allows security across a platform, accessibility, etc., is not anything that would issue some type of compliance problem of any kind. What's off the table? I'm not sure. I would love to hear from Randa. Actually, they do much more on the device and everything like that. We use some device-derived data, but most of that is to vet and further qualify some of the IP-based technology that we have. I would think more along collecting from device, collecting on device, app-based. I think that probably toes the line a little more. Correct me if I'm wrong, Randa.
No, you're right. You're right. And so what we do is we work with anonymized data because we are concerned about PII. But what I will say is you've got a walled garden with the apps and the app data. And as long as in the terms of agreement that the consumer has, you tell them what you're doing with the data and they get express permission, then you can do more. And I think consumers are willing to trade a little bit of data or their information to get better recommendations. And I think that's a fair exchange because it's a walled garden. You don't see any of our customers or HBO, for instance, turning around and selling that data externally. And that's really where there are a lot of privacy issues and where we're going to see a lot of changes in the future in the cookieless world.
Okay, well, that's another topic, but I want to quickly have us all say goodbye because we only have 2 minutes left. Sarah, do you have something quick that you want to say on personalization just to leave us?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the customer. So as much as we can create experiences that resonate with our customers, then that's where, you know, we can succeed as an industry.
Okay, keep customers happy. Jerry, your comments?
Enable options and reduce friction.
Enable option reduce friction. Okay. Rhonda?
Better data, better outcomes, happier consumers.
All right. Justin?
I'll echo the better data part, and I will put the shameless piece in there to thank Streaming Media, Sarah, Randa, Jerry, and of course Nadine for leading us as the sponsor of this. It's been wonderful, and look forward to an opportunity to do it again.
Thank you. We're done. All right. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everyone. That was a great session. And once again, I would like to remind people that the session will be available for on-demand viewing at Streaming Media's YouTube channel. And have to thank our sponsor, Limelight Networks, one more time. And we'll see you tomorrow for day 2 of Streaming Media West Connect.
Great. Goodbye.